All right, we're in the home stretch now. Andres Duany is going to present a lecture that he's recently developed on the topic of agricultural urbanism.
I was asked to show pictures. And so this one is rather well illustrated, but it actually happens to be one of the things that the new urbanism is working on in terms of the kind of thing that's going to work in the 21st century. You know, what some people, I think, ironically call the new urbanism, which is keeping up with the changes in society. Now, I always take care when I begin to speak about, to tell you what I am not going to talk about, because I don't have enough time, okay? And one of them is the entire agenda of preservation of open space, particularly open space as agriculture. I know there's a lot of competition for this appellation, but the finest soil in the United States for growing winter crops and vegetables is in South Florida. And that is because we're the only really subtropical area. And this is just south of the Dade County line. There's an enormous amount of agriculture there that can bring you, you know, the fresh strawberries in winter and so forth without shipping them from Chile. About 7 years ago, we were asked to do an agricultural retention study. The study to retain the cropland. I'm sorry, it's over here. To retain the cropland of the South. And the problem that we found is that it is not the highest and best use. Okay? It is not the highest and best use because, of course, South Florida, because of the weather, is so desirable. But what killed it was the Central American Free Trade Agreement, which made the growing of crops in the United States really economically unviable. I have not shown these slides for a very long time, and the reason I bring them out is that it is alive again, because crops are suddenly, of this kind, are suddenly much more economically viable than development, and it would be permanently so. So this report that was, whose conclusion, those of us who are urbanists would say it was shot down. But in fact, there was a government study, and the conclusion was that highest and best use was development. Now, it's no longer the case. Highest and best use by a very long shot is crops, because of the carbon loading that takes place from bringing them, you know, what Kunstler calls the 1,000-mile Caesar salad is unviable. People want to know where the farming comes from, but also because development is dead. And part of this report involved doing the economics for clustering, which you see here. By the way, you should know, those of you who think that drawing an urban boundary is enough, as most people who don't know anything about the United States think, is a huge amount of America, if not most of it, has been rezoned for 2-acre to 5-acre zoning. And this was done in the 1970s, or is it late 60s, with Jimmy Carter, so that in order for farmers to get loans, the bankers could not take crops as collateral. They didn't know crops. They didn't understand, you know, that it could go up and could go down. So what they did is they rezoned vast swaths of America in areas that nobody ever thought would ever be developed. It was simply a fiction that they could put in their file and say, you know, it's all collateralized by 2-acre zoning. And this has happened, I don't know whether it goes as far as Texas, this has happened all over the South. And it's one of the reasons that we cannot draw urban boundaries in the South. There are others, but that is one of them. So you can only induce development by clustering. This is where the art stood. Where the art stood when we finished this is farmers are doing a great thing, and you cluster the development to give them the value. Now, something has happened since, which is growing food itself has risen up in the estimation of our culture to the point that you can't turn around or bring up the subject without somebody saying, I do it, I want to do it. The bestseller, Michael Pollan's book. More and more and more people are growing food, and it is becoming to the point that 3 of our clients have asked us to design agricultural communities, which is absolutely extraordinary. You know, and I must say I was skeptical for the first one. I am a person who has never gotten his fingernails dirty, either by, with dirt or oil, I might add. And I thought it was absolutely mad. I do know how hard it is to grow things, because I have, you know, I grew up in a place where people farmed, and it was really hard work. I knew that much, and I thought it very unlikely. I am now building a case as a result of a very good experience doing a project in Vancouver, Agricultural Urbanism in Vancouver, a project that has me more excited than anything in a very long time. And part of the excitement is that everyone is excited. Now, as with everything, there needs to be a kind of deeper explanation. And it comes this way, and I spoke about this yesterday. If you were around, you would have heard it. There is climate change as the greatest ethical problem that we have. There's an ethical approach to climate change. We must not do it. We must not carbon load because it harms nature. That's the ethical explanation, the explanation that, on which Al Gore counts. There is another way of thinking about it, which is much less important at the moment, which has to do with working at a different scale, and rather than mitigation, which is mitigate the problems so that nature is salvaged, it is called adaptation. And it's based on, if we don't win this race, we're not going to be able, times are going to get tough, and we need to adapt our communities. We need to circle the wagons around our communities rather than the broad conception of let's work at the level of the world. Now, if you follow the arguments, the scientists are getting more and more hysterical about the prospects of being able to get it on time. They're talking about the tipping point. And the tipping point is getting closer and closer. It used to be 12 years, 8 years, now it's 2 years. Just follow the press. It's getting closer and closer and closer. And that tipping point, by the way, it used to be inches, now it's feet, now it's, you know, you begin hearing about the flood going up, etc. There's also some evidence that there will be some social instability associated with this from very reputable organizations like the British government. Okay? When things get hot, people are going to move south. They will be poorer than you are. Things will be disrupted. Social instability, nothing new about that. During most of history, we've had social instability. What is going to happen, and as a planner, I have to think about the future, not the present. I have to conceptualize the future, if only the near future. In very short order, within 5 years, the American take on global warming is not going to be mitigation, which is to say the ethical understanding that we do it for nature, because we're going to find that the Chinese are not cooperating. You know, we're cutting down our cars while the Chinese are building 800,000 new cars for Beijing alone, that the Indians are now going to have 600 new cars a year, that we're not going to find fuel to replace anything quickly. You know, we're going to be on coal a very long time. And suddenly it's going to dawn upon us that we're not going to make it. And, you know, the tipping point involves it's too late to change it. So instead of working at the level of the world, carbon trading, we're going to say we're going to work at the level of the community. Now, I'm going to give you one example that makes it clear. If you work at the level of the world, the ethical, you buy a solar panel on the basis of sacrifice. You say, I want that solar panel because it loads the carbon less, and I know it's costly. I know it pays for itself in 8 years. Of course, most Americans move every 5 years, so it's not the best deal in the world. But you do it because it's the right thing to do. Okay, now if you're going to sell houses with solar panels, you will only attract the ethicist market, the ethical market. But there's another way to present it, which is you can also do it, you can also sell exactly the same solar panel to the survivalist market. And the way you sell it is you say, by the way, you need that solar panel to bridge the blackouts. You know, don't get hysterical about permanent loss of, you know, of the electrical grid, but there are going to be blackouts. Nothing so unusual about that, and the solar panel is going to be helpful. Those are two different ways of presenting green. Right now, we generally present the first way, and there's a market for it. And there are other markets. There's the cool green market, there's the gadget green market, but the huge, huge market is going to be something akin to the survivalist market. This is very real. Like, for example, if you mention the word adaptation to Al Gore, he blows his top, because he wants you to do it for ethical reasons and for the sake of nature. He doesn't want Americans withdrawing and saying, look, we're not doing it for nature, we're doing it for ourselves. So that, of course, has everything to do with food growing, because food supply, food independence is very important. Of course, the whole system won't collapse, but every once in a while, as in wartime, you may want to have your own chicken, etc. Now, overlaid on that is the pleasure of growing your own food, for whom many people it's a hobby. It is the #1 hobby in the United States, is gardening. Last year, more vegetable seeds were sold than flower seeds for the first time ever. Williams-Sonoma and people who process food and sell garden furniture, Smith & Hawken, for example. Williams-Sonoma is not doing so well recently, but Smith & Hawken, until recently, the business of growing food was huge. And you all know that, Michael Pollan's book and so forth. So we tap into that. And we were alerted to this by a developer in Vancouver who didn't so much want to do the right thing as to be very, very well positioned competitively. Okay? We knew in the old days that you couldn't grow food unless you had infrastructure to support it. Some place has to, you have to have tractors and trucks and farmers markets. This is part of the old attitude towards green. And so I want to take that aside. Of course, yes, we should cluster. That's a way of preserving open space. We should preserve agriculture the old way, do what we can to the small farmer. Then there's also places that are getting smaller. Detroit, Flint, Michigan. Many places that a small percentage of the land is being used. And when you say, well, isn't Detroit more pleasant now that there are gardens? Gardens are just a pain beyond what you want, and we've done projects in places like St. Louis in which we gave an empty lot to the house next to it, which somewhat increased the value, but it wasn't, a cure-all. In Detroit, there are areas, this is a plan of Detroit. This was done, by the way, probably about 10 years ago, in which we took the areas that were along the highways and we basically said they make exceptional gardens. This is the detail of one of the highways of Detroit, and it shows how you can buffer the highways with gardens and then within it create a community. That's 10 years old. There's going to be a lot of that. This is a very large-scale version of what is happening in cities that have empty lots. It's beyond community gardens. It's community gardens to make use of real estate, and actually, incidentally, make Detroit more attractive. Now, I spoke about the transect this morning. I spoke about the codes that are written not with a single setting, but with all 6 settings. And this is one of the diagrams. This one was done for England, where we did the plan for Hertfordshire County. And here you see T1, which is wilderness, then rural, then suburban, urban general, urban center, and urban core. And as you heard me say this morning, for each of these, we write code. The kinds of streets, the kinds of swales, the kinds of lighting, the noise ordinances, you name it. The type of wind generators, the materials, masonry and wood, flat roofs, pitch roofs, density, parking, everything. Everything that concerns us is integrated in the smart code. And lately, we have integrated, or we are integrating agriculture. The issue of chickens. By the way, I had lunch with somebody whose mother's about to buy chickens. When was the last time I had a meal in which somebody didn't have an acquaintance that was about to buy chickens? I can't remember. There's always somebody about to buy chickens because it's the next big thing. And our codes have not kept up with that any more than they have with working at home, with mixed use. And you observe chickens, by the way, empirical reality. Don't go by the books. watch a chicken. See what noise a chicken makes. You know, the issue of the rooster who crows, the quantity of the chicken, how far away can you hear a rooster? How many eggs do you actually need? You know, for purposes of having a pet, it's nice to have a pet that actually produces meat and egg rather than just simply eats, you know, meat or fish. By the way, have you seen the article already, Attacking Cats? Have you gotten that one yet? Well, cats eat protein, and protein is usually fish. And it's causing a problem. You know, the fish of the ocean are competing with the cats for the same small fish. And that's how things appear in this country. They first appear as small glimmers, and then they become huge. Having cats be politically incorrect is not that far away. Having them be illegal is perhaps just a couple of decades away. Dogs, by the way, eat vegetables, so they're going to be fine for a while. And by the way, this is very true. When you go to Cuba, for example, Havana's full of dogs and no cats. And I said, what's up with this? Is it because cats are edible? And they said, no. It's just that cats need protein while dogs are vegetarians, if you induce them. So they can afford dogs. But anyway, in this transect, as we write all the rules, in this case for England, we have begun to engage the issue of how you grow food. Now, but there's another larger issue. And it's interesting to go to a place like England where the government is much more powerful than the United States. And it's a little bit like the canary in the mine shaft. The Europeans, of course, are much more concerned about global warming because they've been worrying about it much longer than we have. They've been at it for about a decade. We've only been at it since Al Gore alerted us. So they're pretty close to hysteria. And among the things that you run across in England is categorical codes from the central government saying the least units, the least density that will be allowed is 14 units to the acre, period. 14 units to the acre, period. So, you know, as a new urbanist, I should say, boy, isn't that great, we won. But instead of doing that, I go out and I look at the English, because like a good new urbanist, I actually observe reality, and they adore their gardens. They adore their gardens. And the older people live for their gardens. There's never been, I mean, we Americans, of course, love our gardens, but the English are maniacs. And here, the central government, categorically, for the sake of a single thing, carbon loading, is basically erasing the possibility of happiness of an enormous number of Englishmen and progressively making the ownership of a garden more expensive and eventually a privilege. And I object to that, because we're new urbanists for the sake of human happiness as self-defined, not some abstraction of carbon. Others take care of carbon. We as planners, should take care of human happiness and enable it to happen everywhere in the transect. So here's a problem. Let's talk about how do you speak to an environmentalist. And the problem is that we're speaking at two different levels. We have two different currencies. And that is a problem because great urbanism is probably the only reason that we will, in the future, persuade Americans to not keep spreading. It's not about urban boundaries. It hasn't even worked in Portland. Where urbanism works, where sprawl is defeated, is where the towns are so good that people don't want to leave them. It's just so good to live in this town that I don't want to go. People love Charleston. People love Portland. They think it's the urban boundary. It ain't. It's because the urbanism is great in Portland. Because if you drew an urban boundary around a miserable place, people would just skip town anyway. Okay? So it's very, very important that environmentalists understand that urbanism is half the tools. It isn't, and there is so much going on about greening the city. Oh, we'll fix it when we have more swales downtown. That'll be the end. You know, that's absolutely ridiculous, because all that does is undermine true urbanism. So let's look at this. If we take the common currency to be diversity, who speaks about diversity? Urbanists speak about diversity. We speak about social diversity. We speak about economic diversity. Mixed use is diversity. Diversity is the currency of urbanists. We now speak about complete streets. You know what that is? Diversity of transportation. The fundamental currency, if you have to use one word for urbanism that makes it healthy, is diversity. Diversity of building types, diversity of incomes, diversity of ages. Guess who speaks about diversity too? Environmentalists. They have the same currency. They want diversity. They want to have more crickets. They want to have more types of fish and so forth. Now, the reasons may vary, but they want more diversity is always good. So let's talk about diversity. The current system of environmentalism assigns the greatest amount of natural diversity to the wilderness, right? And the least amount of natural diversity to the urban core. And that is why so many rules are written that preclude inadvertently the swale rules, the water filtration rules, the berming rules, the 45% open space rules, all these rules that are written for environmental purposes green the city and make the city less possible. In other words, because of this conception of environmentalism in which diversity is the highest in the wilderness and lowest in the core. By the way, in the core, imagine Times Square, which is basically paved. Okay? I understand there are 4 trees, but I have never seen them. In Times Square, it's basically paved. So you have this model, this conceptual model, which is completely in error, because what it does is it rates suburban sprawl, which is T2. See a suburbia? Suburbia, because it has more green, it has more nature, rates higher than the urban core. And that is why you're getting more and more environmental projects, and more of them that are more and more suburban, dressed differently, you know, with more advanced looking architecture and green roofs, but ever more open space and ever less urbanism. Okay? So any conception that rates suburbia as more environmental than urban core is mortally flawed. Now, what would happen if we mix both, and of course, the opposite is this. The other currency is social diversity, okay? Urbanists value social diversity. Social diversity increases, right, as it goes up to the center. There are more different people always at the core than as you go in the suburbs. The suburbs are monocultures. They're shopping monocultures, income monocultures, etc. So you have the opposite. You have the opposite. When you put social diversity, it grows towards the center. If you combine both kinds of diversity, you would get this diagram, which is the correct diagram. The correct diagram is that the wilderness rates highest and best because it has the most natural diversity, and the urban core has the most social diversity. So they rate, in combination they rate, and correctly, the suburbs are at the lowest point. That is the correct theory. That actually explains the reality or the intended reality. By the way, you have to take everything back to fundamental theory to check it. I mean, otherwise you make mistakes. So this is fundamental theory. Now there's a problem with this, which is we can't just say suburbia is categorically awful. Look at that. You can't do it because you are not credible in America. You can't just say the single-family house in the lot is a problem. So the presentation that the smart code makes is that if you want to live in the suburbs, this has to be raised. You have to try harder to mitigate the fact that you have neither social diversity nor natural diversity. And the way you do it is you take the single-family house and you make it do more. That is where the green roof happens. That is where you do your own composting. That is where you can generate some of your electricity. Don't ask the town center building to pathetically, in whatever little roof it has, right, have solar collectors up there, because that's going to light the elevator buttons. It's just a joke. Okay, it's just a joke. And besides, they don't need to compensate. By living densely already, they're doing the environmental job. New York is the most environmental place in America because everybody lives very tightly. Everybody walks to everything, or they take transit. And the fact that it's paved over is irrelevant, okay? Because they're actually doing, and if it weren't that way, they would be spreading all over the landscape. So we have to understand that New York is part of the solution, not part of the problem. By the way, most environmental metrics would look at New York and say, the whole place is paved, the whole place is a heat sink, the ecological footprint's a disaster. And it goes to show you how corrupt the intellectual underpinnings of current environmentalists is. Any metric that makes Manhattan a problem is dead wrong, because Manhattan is part of the solution. But that's what an environmental footprint assessment does. Manhattan loses. That's wrong. So what we're trying to do with the smart code is blend both theories. We want to bring urbanism as an environmental tool. So we need to raise this one. How do we raise it? How do we raise the center? By demanding a better environmental performance, which, by the way, as it happens, the house can do. You can compost in the house. Don't try it in the tub of your apartment. Okay, don't try it because you're going to upset people. And by the way, don't have a composting toilet in the apartment because you can't ventilate it properly and you're going to get divorced. Okay, so don't do that. But it's all right in a house. And above all, you can grow food, more food. You can grow food anywhere. You can grow food in a flower box, but you can grow more food in the apartment. So what we were asked to do by this developer in Vancouver is environmental urbanism. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Agricultural urbanism, not urban agriculture, which has been around for a while, but agricultural urbanism. Everybody who lives in a place has to, in some measure, grow food. I'm going to show you how that happens. Okay, this is the area, and the diagram I showed you here of the transect, we're looking at this center part. This is the pivotal area. This is the pivotal area. Totally delightful, as you can see. You know, the single-family house on the yard could be enormously well done, and this is where the action, where it has to be corrected. It has nothing to do with aesthetics. Okay, so there are ways to do it in which you add, this is a relatively recent plan, but not the most recent, and it basically adds different amounts, small lots and large lots. Okay, this is a plan in North Carolina that's driven by agriculture. And it is, and in this one, agriculture is the new golf. Ag is the new golf. And this works several ways. Number one, it does provide the long views that people really enjoy and pay for. Number two, it handles the spray of the effluent of the cleansed water of the sewer plant. And I can't tell you how many golf courses have been paid for or have been in fact argued for, oh, this is the only way we can handle the water. That's the way we can filter it. We need to speak a little bit about the economics because it goes this way. You're gonna ask, and if you've ever been in a farm, you're gonna ask, hey, this isn't going to work. A, some people don't want, I'm gonna leave it here so it doesn't distract you. Some people, this isn't gonna work. A, some people aren't gonna work, it's hard work. Okay. B, you're not gonna make money doing it. Right? And C, it's hard work, some people don't want to do it at all, and it may not be profitable. Mow your own lawn, that's also labor that you're putting in. I mean, there's a lot of labor that goes on in the suburbs that would be allocated. So basically, we have the budget, we have the people to cover the difficulty, and one last thing, what if you don't want to do it? Well, you don't have to buy here. You have a choice. This is a homeowners association. It's run like a homeowners association. There's private government. You know, homeowners associations are private contracts. It's private government. It's government by contract. You don't have to live here. Because you don't have to live there, it can be very, very precise about what it makes you do. As you know, in these associations, they tell you how much the grass can grow. Where I live, they tell you about the shrubs. They tell you about the colors of the doors. They tell you about the weight of your dog. They tell you anything they want. That instrument that has been generated, and there are over 200,000 of them in the United States, that instrument that is normally used to establish completely idiotic standards, that very same instrument can be done to establish intelligent administration. Now, when you speak to a farming consultant, they say, you know, this has to be highly organized. You know, people can't just decide to plant all the tomatoes on Monday, because if you plant them on Monday, 7 weeks later, they're all picked the same within 2 days, and everything rots. Nobody wants them. Okay? So basically, what you sign up for is a certain amount of administration in which they say, okay, everybody who's growing tomatoes, and we know there are 7 of you, plant 1 row Monday, 1 row Wednesday, 1 row Friday, 1 row Monday. Plant like that so that they come into maturity, and then we have a chance of selling them to the restaurants and the schools downtown. So in other words, you sign up for a co-op that administers it, and they administer the water and the tractors and the labor that actually comes to your garden Monday, Wednesday, Friday, etc., if you want it. So you sign up for this. And if you think that's too much, you love the community, but it's too much, fine, don't buy a house, buy an apartment. And in an apartment, all you're responsible for is a window box, unless you want a garden balcony. And if you want to do all the work yourself and not be in the co-op, and you kind of like the socialization, well, just belong to a little community garden where you can hold a hoe and pretend that you're working if that's your main thing. Okay? And it doesn't matter if nothing rots. So there's a whole declension. There's no single answer. So as I said, there's a mechanism that's economic and administrative. There's a whole declension of ways to do it, which I'm going to show you from large to small. And it is part of the solution, which is what marketing is going to be about in very short order. Part of the solution. The golf course is part of the problem. This suburban house is part of the problem. The house that grows its own food is part of the solution. A complete repositioning in the market of what is going to be, which is still going to matter in the 21st century because things are going to be competitive. You will be competing with other developers that have much less good ideas. Just like golf course was a brilliant idea at one point, this is the next good idea to put you in an economic advantage. Okay, so this is a transect. Notice what the transect does. Notice that over here at the core, notice that the houses are attached. Notice that there's very little landscape. As it goes rural, note how the houses separate more and more. The setbacks get bigger. They separate from each other. The setbacks get bigger. There's an increasing amount of green. And as you go into the rural areas, all formal discipline in terms of frontage is lost. So this is a transect of how, this is a diagram that explains to the people what the code actually does. If you live in T6, this is what you do. If you live in T4, this is what you do. And as I said, everything folds into this, the density, the lot, what you can grow, how many chickens, etc., at any level. So you take the ways of growing food, and I'm going to read you this, okay? What I'll be reading are these. The first one is forageable land. Forageable land is the stuff that you can't plant. It's mushrooms and berries and nuts. You just go pick them. Forageable land. Then there are farms over here in T2, which is rural. And then there are specialty farms that, see, the trouble with farms is that tractors clank in the morning and farmers get up early and they are obnoxious to the neighbors. You can only have farming up close when it's hand-tended agriculture, where you pick it yourself, spray it yourself, etc. No machinery, which means it has to be higher value agriculture because you need more labor. That's why it becomes, so this is tractor agriculture, this is hand-tended agriculture, and then there are community gardens, yard gardens, which are front, yard gardens, which are back, kindred gardens, container gardens, roof gardens, etc., balcony window boxes, and finally roof gardens, etc. This is a little bit, I don't know why this one's so messed up. But basically, there's a very clean declension from real farming with tractors to hand-tended agriculture, all the way to your balcony, your window box, your roof. So everybody gets to participate. And notice that there is a mitigation that takes place. The more land you have, the more you're asked to grow. Now, one little detail, which is the front garden. The new urbanist deal is you code the front, people behave in the front, and you do whatever you want in the back, including grill hot dogs in your underwear. You know, the new urbanism protects the right to be a slob in the back. And any new urbanist community that is neat in the front and the back is not a new urbanist community, because part of human happiness is to not have to pull yourself together when you're outdoors. That's why our alleys are not neat. That's why the backyards are so private, so you can do whatever your dream is out there, which is normally obnoxious to the neighbor, whatever you're doing. So the new urbanist communities have a lot more privacy. So of course, having observed what a garden looks like, a vegetable garden, I realize the thing is pretty damn ugly. It doesn't look good a lot of the time. Okay? This is not an aesthetic operation. It's fallow a lot of the time. There are dying leaves. Tools are around. There's no compunction to be neat. Most people who grow gardens, there's no compunction. To be neat, they use any old pavement. And obviously, I put it in the back. I put the garden in the back. And then I found out during the charrette that we had in Vancouver that gardening is fantastically sociable. Much more sociable than the vaunted porch of the new urbanism. You know, which we said, oh, you build a porch in front, it gives you a room in which you can sit there and watch your neighbor come by and perhaps engage in social conversation, which of course a hermetic ranch house doesn't let you do it. The porch does contribute. The problem is that we Americans don't know how to sit, you know, without some activity. The garden performs two functions that are terrific for human interaction. First of all, you can hold a hoe and think that you're working. You can look at the vegetables and watch them grow. That is a form of labor. You can, you know, pick up a little bit. But in other words, you hang around a lot longer when there's work to be done. And the other thing which is terribly important, it is very difficult for strangers to engage themselves directly. I'm talking to you. It's much easier to talk about something. You know, and that's why dogs are such famous conversation starters. Right? You take the pressure off the individual meeting, you talk about the dog, you talk about the baby, you talk about the shop front, you talk about the event and the festival. Much more, much more. There is nothing that generates more conversation than vegetables. How are your tomatoes? I mean, this is even easier than baseball conversation, which is an unbelievable chore to keep up with everything. You know, how are your tomatoes? When did you plant them? Hey, they look pretty nice and red. Where'd you get your seeds? Or they rotted. What's up? Oh, you have that pest. What are you doing about it? I mean, constant conversation, constant. So that fulfills, to a greater degree than any other frontage, social interaction, which is the act of labor, which is justified in a Calvinist society, which we are, and the other one is, you know, the problem we have with intimacy. You can take it out on the tomato. So this is a major new urbanist discovery. Okay, so something about the new urbanism and something about the smart code is that you know, when people say you're only coding 8 setbacks, and they say the architects particularly say you're repressing my creativity, to which I answer, we're coding only 8 setbacks, but right now you only have 2. Because in suburbia, there are only 2 setbacks, the parking lot or the 25-foot front yard. So by having 8 setbacks, you've enormously increased the possibility. Now, the 8 setbacks that we code and allow are setbacks that support human walking, human activity. We do not, there's a whole bunch that are not allowed. So there's not an infinite number. Sociologists have been doing their work, and there is a limited number of setbacks that actually work. So it's not a PUD in which you come in and negotiate and get it wrong, which is mostly what happens. You know, the PUD in which everything's negotiated is a tremendous problem. So in this way, too, this way of farming, the typology of buildings, the types of buildings that are associated with farming, in fact, are a great number, but not an infinite number. And these are the ones that we found. And they're like this. Of course, there is the 1-acre farm, and we know what its performance is. We know exactly what its performance is, what it can do. Okay? So there's the 1-acre farm. You put the house in the corner. Notice how it's a transect from most rural to most urban. And then there is the half-acre farm, and then there is the 1/4-acre garden. Okay? And these are gardens. Notice how they all face the sun. Okay? This is a new urbanism that is actually loaded in towards the sun, because shadow immediately sort of, you know, sanitizes the possibility of vegetables all need sun. And then you have much higher density, which is 16 units to the acre, which is the townhouse, and notice how they're loaded differently. And this is all being drawn on 1 acre. Okay? And then, by the way, this is perfect for seniors. Seniors love this. You can do single-story units. They have your own little yard, your own little courtyard, highly sociable, no need for an elevator, your own front door. Perfect little units for retirement. We've designed them in several places. And then there is the actual townhouse. And notice how having to have the garage in the back creates a more difficult asymmetry. These already are the front gardens I'm speaking about. See how the garden over here is in the back between the townhouse and the garage because the sun comes in this direction. These are the front gardens. And of course, these townhouses here are tuck under parking. These are the townhouses that are getting the sunlight. And these are front gardens. Those walking here already are associating with the, with the people. And then there is the roof garden. At one point, you get sufficient density that you put it on the roof. No problem at all. It works very well. I've seen many roof gardens. And it doesn't take much more than a tap, because the structure is usually good enough. And then there is the community garden. At one point, the density is so high that it is inefficient to have it anywhere in your unit, but you have it adjacent to your unit. And at this point, some people decide to contract out. They may have, you don't have to bring the gardener in your roof. If you don't like the idea of the gardener in your roof, the outsider in your garden, you can have a community garden. And then there is the inner block garden, okay, in which the community is smaller. You've seen some of these in Europe. And by the way, these are not associated with the units immediately adjacent, because some people may want a unit and not want to have the garden. So notice how the walkway is on the edge. And finally, there is the balcony garden, which can be collective or individual, facing south. Okay? Now, all of these types, most of these types do not exist in urbanism. You stumble across them a little bit, but the specific design of each of these types is why this is called urban agriculture. The entire site plan is designed to enable this to happen. This is the Vancouver project. It connects a town here with a town here, and this is woodland. By the way, this is the United States. That's the border. And they did not participate in the public process. So anything obnoxious we put near the Americans, no problem. And what this scheme does, the formula of this that the developer proposed is, I will build on 1/3, he owns this farm. He's owned this farm for a very long time. It's an obvious place to grow. It's practically an infill project. He says, I will build on 1/3 of the land and I will triple agricultural production. To which you say, how can you do that? Well, there's nothing more efficient than having everyone who lives here applying energy and wealth tending agriculture. Of course you're going to triple production. It's incredibly efficient. When people who buy into this place, in fact, do that. By the way, each of these squares that you see here is 1 acre, which is to say what I was showing you earlier can contain any one of those elements. On one side, because it's a hill, there's a hilltop town here, and the water flows in, and it's somewhat polluted water. We intercept the water and cleanse it, and then it comes downhill. But the most important thing is the relationship to the edge, how the farming works. Let me show you. So here's the edge. This is where a lot of the action takes place. Now, what we tried to do here is have people grow food at different scales, but still remain in the community, attached to the community, not isolated. Right? So this is the edge of the community. Notice how it goes in and out, and notice the T-shaped, these T-shaped areas. These are the big farms. Okay, these are the 15-acre and 20-acre farms out there. Notice how the farmhouse is still on the drive at the edge of the community. The farm is there, rather the farmhouse is there, the farm is out there. These are the smaller ones. I forget how much, I think these are the 10-acre farms. These are the 10-acre. Notice how they're embedded. See how they're embedded in there? So they're much smaller, but the houses are still on the form part of the society. And then over here, these are much smaller, and you can see they're actually farm clusters. These are people that farm smaller acreage, 1/2 acre, 1/4 acre. There's a whole variety of them. That's 1 acre there. That's 1 acre. And then there are those other elements that I showed you that are on the ground. These are this is growing food on the ground. Now, there may be a front garden that's private. There may be an inner block garden. There may be a community garden. That's on the ground. And then this set is up in the air. These are the balconies, window boxes, and roof gardens. So you see the whole declension going from urban to rural. And everybody happily, and this is the filtration system for the water. It picks up from the existing town, filters it grabs it here, it settles, it filters. It doesn't have to be drinking water. And then it comes down on an existing canal system and gives and provides the water on one side. So the water comes from one side, and from the other side come the tractors and the fertilizer and the people picking up the vegetables. This is the town center. And the town center is deeply associated with agriculture. For example, there's an obvious set of barns. You don't need your own barn because the barns are there. Okay? This is where the roosters are in case you need one. Because you only have the chickens, remember? So the roosters are here. There are cows and goats and all sorts of different kinds of milk to make cheese. There's the water tower, which is symbolic. I know you don't need it anymore. You can have a pump in a box. But the water tower is symbolic. Also, it's great advertising. Also, it's less energy. And then over here, there's a clean side, which is the square, and that's the farmer's market, and the trucks come in and back into it. And over here is the restaurant and essentially cannery. Because you can't process everything that you grow. It has to be, it has to be collectively processed. That could be part of your contribution. Say, I don't want to get my fingers dirty, but I don't mind stewing tomatoes and putting them in bottles. And so there's that goes there. Then there's a cooking school and a teaching establishment here, which the University of Tsawwassen is putting in. And then finally, there's a kind of theater barn meeting hall, which is the equivalent of and everything blends into each other. The cooking school is associated with a restaurant. The canning is associated with a market. But it's all mutually supportive. It's an incredibly symbiotic relationship, and with lots and lots of reasons to go downtown. The conventional stores are on the other side here in live-work units. Okay, so this is the new town center. Where does this budget come from? The clubhouse. You take your gatehouse budget, your clubhouse budget, your pool budget, right? And this is how you build this. And believe me, this sells real estate. And the universities come in, because actually the young people, farming is now, believe it or not, glamorous. The farmers can finally get dates. It's amazing. Now, this is what you see at the edge. This is the actual manifestation. That's the farm. You know what's over here? This is affordable housing for the people that do the difficult work. Because our consultants were people that grew food. We had consultants that were amazing. Amazing people who said, there's one who works in the Bahamas who said, let me tell you about growing food. This is the formula. 5 acres, 5 Haitians, $5 million gross. That's what you need to know. Amazing. By the way, DPZ doesn't gross $5 million, and we have 42 people. How they do that with 5 Haitians is astronomical. It's absolutely extraordinary. It's a great business. Of course, you have to know how to do it. You have to have the contracts. You have to have a lunch that sells your surplus and so forth. It's expertly done. But you can learn to do it. But the important thing is you have labor. And labor can be students, although I have found that students rarely last more than 2 months. The American youth is not up to it. It is absolutely not up to it. However well-intended they are, and so we have our tougher southern neighbors, thank God, are able to do that. But also bear in mind something, that they also know how to grow food and we don't. So these are their gardens. This is the actual laboratory. This is the actual incubator. If your tomatoes aren't doing well, go back and see your buddy over here. That'll show you how to grow a tomato. So an integral part of this, look at the sophistication of the consultants we had. An integral part of this is you've got to have actually people of the land that you hire who are allowed to work for themselves, because that, in fact, is the standard that's set for the rest of you who don't know what the hell you're doing. And that was the proposition. Now, you realize that there's a level of realism here, about what's possible. At the same time that it's incredibly ideal, incredibly wonderful, there's a level of realism about what's happening. Now, remember, this is being done on the chassis of a homeowners association that is spending money anyway on ornamental landscaping. Okay? So it's not like, oh, a new subsidy. It's something we do anyway. This is a village done in England, because as I said, basically the maniacs at Whitehall had banned villages. There is no reason for a village to be, right? No more villages. Everything compact, everything minimum 14 units to the acre. Do you know how we justified the village in this public process? And of course you could see people practically weeping. I mean, I'm not kidding. These Brits are really tough. You bring in the weeping widow, and it doesn't matter, because carbon loading is the most important thing, because the polar bear is more important than the weeping widow, right? So we reinvented the village. We made the cases. They said a village, and you have these beautiful British villages, English villages, and you say, how can you not allow a village anymore? And the answer is because the transport is inefficient for transportation, at which point we say, well, why was a village ever justified in the first place? A village is a machine to grow food. That's why a village exists. It's a machine to grow food. And here you have a village transect from the center, you know, the high street, and you can see how it works with the larger farms at the edge, and then the farming coming in a declension of the transect, pretty much like I described it. You know, again, from the bigger farm to the, and here you have it from the edge. Here's the large farm at the edge. This is giving to a very large tract. And here you have the 1 acre and the half acre all the way in. You see the community gardens, and finally you see the terrace houses with their landscaping, etc. Now, I mention this not only because I consider this to be incredibly important, but I consider really creative green coding to be dealing with things like this, and not just more windmills and more, you know, photovoltaic cells and so forth. There's only so much that you can do if you're going to be a planner. And you know what? The entire technological fix is solved. You don't have to do any more research. Get the book called Sustainable Urbanism. And if you don't want to read the book, download the module on Sustainable Urbanism that deals with the 6 things that it has to. What we need to do is address the future in this way. We have all the tools. We have all the tools. The society is telling us this. The market has crashed to the point that nothing else works. This is the only kind of thing that's going to work. No house sold in, you know, that's going to be built in North Dallas has a chance of competing with all that stuff that's being remaindered now at 60 cents on the dollar. But you can right now build one of these. If you have a project that in fact is not quite, you know, you own the land anyway, and when is the market ever going to come back? You don't go back to the old market. You don't go back to the old experience and the old ideas. That's totally dead. This is what you go back to. You go back to this kind of idea. This is what the 21st century looks like. And the combination is perfect. It is sociable, which people still want. It is healthy. It tastes good. It occupies your time without a great deal of frivolity and money spending. It's probably very good discipline for children that need an incredible amount of discipline to overcome what they're being taught on television. And in any case, there's a generation that wants to have ethical behavior anyway. Like the kids really want to be asked to do things. The kids really want, I'm not saying they want to go out and milk the cow at dawn. Okay? But going out to the fish pond and saying, hey kid, catch dinner, that doesn't sound like an extreme punishment. That sounds, in fact, like one of the nicer things you can put in your sales brochure. Oh, and by the way, your daughter can go out and fish dinner at the fish pond. That is the kind of thing that sells real estate in the 21st century. And I know that because we had consultants. I know that because the level of excitement that I have run across when I show this, I've not encountered since the old days of the porch and the picket fence. Now, anybody who tries to do this is probably going to find it's illegal. You know, from A to Z. It's illegal because, you know, the maniacs that wrote the suburban codes left nothing alone in the pursuit of some kind of utopia that included having no chickens. And that's one of the things you have to address, because you can't ask people to behave environmentally and just say drive less or take transit. That isn't going to cut it. You know why? Because it doesn't sell. That only sells a very small sliver of real estate. This is the kind of thing that is completely marketable and completely, it's as they say, good and good for you. So thank you for listening.